Thank you so much again to everyone. And thank you both, Yasminka, Dalibor, for inviting me to speak here. To be in Split, in this beautiful museum, has great resonance. As Dalibor mentioned, my late father-in-law, the sculptor Oscar Nemon, was born in Osijek in 1906. He lived there until he was 18, when he moved to Vienna and then Brussels, and finally England in 1939. As someone of Jewish heritage, this last move allowed him to survive World War II. Almost all his family who remained in former Yugoslavia were killed. I've included 3 of Nemon's sculptures in your handouts. You can see him with his portrait of Freud from 1936 on the first page. He sculpted Freud from life in 31 and 36 in Vienna. Humanity is his Holocaust memorial, now in Osijek, which is your second image. I met Nemon through his son Falcon when I was 16. I was recovering from the trauma of having been groomed and sexually abused in childhood by my mother. At that time, I was unable to speak about it. With the warmth and the kindness that he had learnt growing up in Osijek, Nemon welcomed me into his family, then rejoiced when Falcon and I later married and had our first child. Although I wasn't able to speak of what was done to me until my 30s, as is the case for many of us who have been subjected to sexual abuse. Even when I was 16, Nemon intuited its shadow. When I came to create my poetry collection, Bird of Winter, many years later, his drawings and sculptures helped me negotiate a path beyond the silences which had imposed themselves on me while I was growing up. You'll be able to find out more about Nemon after. Living with Nemon's work, I understood how shape and form create spaces of meaning where viewer and artist can meet on equal terms. I'm a writer by training, and most of my poems are primarily textual. But as Bird of Winter came together, I found a visual sequence emerging, which forms the collection's narrative spine and tells its story. I'll share this sequence with you tonight to honor Nemon and his connections to Croatia and the encouragement that Mestrovic gave him when he was starting out as a young Jewish man with no connections to the art world. I've put all the poems I'll be reading tonight on your handout, so you can see the shapes they make on the page. As you'll discover, the majority are hand erasures. That is a page of text I erased by hand, leaving only a few words to make up the poem. There are also a number of collages, combining my own words with found materials. Together, these poems create spaces of imaginative play, where the reader may engage more safely and with greater agency with difficult materials. Before I read the poems, I'll say a little more about Bird of Winter's erasures, which begin on the second page of your handout. All grow from texts about Pompeii and Herculaneum, which have absorbed me since childhood. As an adult, the eruption of Vesuvius and subsequent laborious excavations of materials buried under the volcanic rock and ash became central to how I understand the slow, often dangerous recovery of my own buried past. This slow process is common to much work that responds to trauma. Each of the Erasure poems was generated over the course of a day, circling words and phrases and blacking out spaces between them, allowing the energy of the poem to emerge. I was letting my eye see, my hand move before my mind had time to censure, and this enabled me sometimes to write about things I could not address otherwise. Working through texts read by thousands of other people over centuries also helped give communal witness to this global crime which impacts millions of us, either directly or through people we know and love. Very sadly, the police in Britain estimate that 1 in 10 children will have experienced some form of sexual abuse by the time they're 16. Visually, as you'll see from page 2, the erasures in Bird of Winter ask the reader to hopscotch from phrase to phrase. But even as the islands of words travel towards revelation and reclamation, they coexist with blacked out passages, witnessing the masses of extinguished and unarticulated materials which are also present. I chose to use a dry board marker which lets the erased words ghost through when I created them to give a sense of the extra material. Reading today, I'm going to tread safely, carefully to keep us all safe. If anything I speak about is difficult for you, the Mind website, MIND, is a good place to go. I'll close with a short grounding exercise to bring us all securely back into this present. In the meantime, if in doubt, keep breathing. I always find it's good to remember. Erasure is, of course, a function of trauma. Our brains conceal or remove what is too dangerous for us to bear, especially when traumatic events occur, when there is no support, as happens in the first poem, Black River, Remembering My Childhood. It's on page 2. Black River. When the fingers came at night, your weeds rose up. When the rocks arrived, you rushed my brain sluices. When the day returned, no hurt could surface. The stupendous task, my first erasure in Bird of Winter, directly answers Black River and is underneath the poem. From Herculaneum, past, present and future, it takes Charles Waldenstein's demand for excavation as the site as the collection's manifesto and call to arms. The stupendous task at Herculaneum can only be tentative and preliminary, but of the highest importance. Ancient Herculaneum must be excavated completely for the good of the living. Every year's delay makes more difficult. To carry out such work, claim the active support and cooperation of the ideals we have in common. What needed to be excavated completely is suggested by my next poem, Pistil, on page 3. Named for the female reproductive parts of the flower, the gun-shaped segment of text is taken directly from my childhood medical notes from a doctor's visit when I was 2. The poem reflects both my distress and fear around contact, and how language was weaponized against me as a child. It also shows how my body gave silent witness through somatized symptoms. Pistil has been well apart from German measles while in France. Difficult with medicines, aggressive and difficult with other children, bites and scratches, difficult to get her off to sleep at night, i.e. spoiled. Ovule, your tummy a hardening ball of ache. Stigma, Papa's photo shows you, aged 2, waist deep in a field of French buttercups with your red anorak zipped and the sky holding you. The second erasure on page 3, Destruction Impact Landscape, grew from the poet Marshall's account of the eruption of Vesuvius. As it took shape, I realized the poem held its own before and after, divided at a midpoint like mirrored reflections. Taken together, they signal that something is not destroyed merely because it is attacked. Destruction, impact, landscape. Here is Vesuvius, green, shady vines, loved dances, hills, the home of Venus, submerged in flames and sad ash. The gods would not wish such power. Although the abuse began in my earliest life, it grew much worse after my father died. On the shoreline on page 4 marks the illness and then death of my father, or Papa, from motor neurone disease when I was 8. Thereafter, my mother made me sleep in her bed every night. Working from found text about a Roman soldier, I was able to lay my father's lost body on the page, so my remembrance could move towards him as waves. On the shoreline, the violent ground surge followed immediately by a glowing avalanche came without warning. A shattered skeleton blown off a terrace 60 feet above the marina, a Roman soldier slammed face down above, sword and scabbard, testifies to the force of the blast. Papa, there was no chronology for your illness. Nothing was said when you needed the stick and then the wheelchair. You sent me drawings from the hospital until your body became the house through which death walked, but did not close the door. The erasure that follows, Gardens, Fountains, combines Columella's and Flore's descriptions of Pompeii and Herculaneum before the eruption. Explorations of trauma often focus on the aftermath of the crime. It was important also to witness the unhurt place, or indeed the innocence of a child's body. Here, spring flowers blossom twice, and a spirit can find light in the memory of her father. Gardens, fountains, irrigated by the waters, sweet marshes near to salt works. Of everything in the whole world, the region is the most beautiful. Spring flowers blossom twice. Fertile its land, those famous harbours, mountains befriend the vine. Beautiful Vesuvius, the coastal cities of Herculaneum, Pompeii. From this stronghold of beauty, Bird of Winter drops hard down into an underworld of darkness. The next erasure, Eyewitness, on page 5, emerges out of a Times article from 1863, describing two of the figures revealed by pouring plaster into the voids left in the ash that fell over Pompeii nearly 2,000 years earlier. It also gave me a way to show my mother and I in her bed. Like the excavations of the two buried cities, these plaster casts are central to Bird of Winter's understanding of how artworks manifest out of voids or absences and make visible what otherwise remains unseen. Eyewitness. Now a road, direction of the amphitheatre, uncovered, called Abbondanza. Our inspection confined to a house recently opened. Inhabitants on heaps of pumice laying, a woman on her side, the girl adjoining I contemplated with great efforts. From the keys, woman was mistress, mother of the girl. From the manner her hands clenched, the girl suffered much, fell, terror running over her head. Imagine Pompeii. Coming next, Remove the Solidified Mix responds to the difficulties of creating Bird of Winter. More generally, it also speaks to the risks entailed in making narratives that encompass wider forms of trauma, including war crimes and other acts of violence. I began with a description from Herculaneum, Italy's buried treasure, of the dangerous, laborious work of tunnelling down through solid rock to the Villa dei Papiri during the 18th century. This was often undertaken by convicts and forced labourers because of its risk. Remove the solidified mix. Recruit diggers. Turn the first spadeful of earth and ash. Good fortune, continue. For several years, pursue systematic tunnelling deep underground. Water and slime drip. Slow and dangerous. Constantly threatened. Only light, feeble, smoky, torches, grotesque. The work truly a labour of incapacity, ignorance, supremely vindicated when well diggers struck the rotunda of a garden belvedere and proceeded with great care to explore 800 dark tunnels. What happened down one of those 800 dark tunnels is documented in "And Now Came the Ashes" on page 6. It's erased from a letter by Pliny the Younger. His description of Vesuvius erupting becomes also my mother and my 8-year-old self in a cottage in Wiltshire. And now came the ashes over the earth like a flood, mother. I was afraid, enveloped in a sealed room without lights, heard death, no gods this night in flames, stopped time, did not utter a single lamentation. As you'll see, the lineation of the poem breaks down at its centre point, as my own life did following my father's death in 1972. Beyond the word death, there is no single or clear path forward, playing out how trauma refuses a conclusive act of narration, but in its fragmentation draws us back and back. And Now Came the Ashes is spoken by my child self, but Bird of Winter is a dialogue between past and present. The poem Her Door is Missing assumes the form of an empty frame, a raft of debris carried through Herculaneum by the pyroclastic flow fills its opening. I wanted the reader to feel how, once a child has been raped, their possibility of refusal is taken from them. Her door is missing, and both hinges are hanging, and the handle is long gone because the latch was smashed off when the burning surge burst through. The next erasure, on page 7, is taken from Seneca the Younger's Natural Questions. This happened during winter asks the reader to consider the implications and process of giving witness to such a crime. This happened during winter, inflicted devastation, disaster, without complaint, being stricken, things shook, split. Demand reasons, adopt courage, listening to those who go there again. Promise them, we believe, an account given, because things hardly standing need to be merely pushed to fall. What the act of testimony may entail is explored further in Delicately Open. As you'll see, there are no white spaces, and it is intentionally very difficult to read. Made to resemble one of the carbonized papyrus scrolls found in the Villa dei Papyri in Herculaneum, its text combines lines from my teenage medical notes with instructions for recovering a burnt papyrus for the reader to piece together as best they can. I am going to represent delicately open with a moment of silence to represent the millions upon millions of people subject to sexual predation around the world who have not been able to speak of what was done to them as undefended children. Why the story of Bird of Winter should be so difficult to tell is held within Gladiatorial Training School on page 8. It works through an excavation report from 1766 to open a pathway to the deepest substrate of memory, where a child is raped by an adult. Gladiatorial Training School. 6th of December, continuing to clear the earth, columns painted red. 20th of December, in the building adjacent to the town walls were found shackles with 3 crossbars, irons, leaving spaces between them, a lock 10 inches high, a rod fastening the prisoner's legs, the hole, the bolt passed. In the hole, the bolt passed. The secret assault by which my mother controlled and subjugated me is placed on the page. To enter this final darkness and voice it is also to open a path back up into the light, as Sagittai, which comes after, reflects. It uses the process of making arrows, Sagittai in Latin, to enact how, when we engage with the traumas that were visited upon us, we begin to claim back our freedom individually and collectively. If words were weaponized against me in pistol, now they are repurposed as arrows of justice and instruments for change. Sagittai. We peel off bark, wing flight. What we're held to, ground against, blades are arrowheads. Fired will leave your hold, eat air, take each cruel mark out, then grow our split body back into tree. From there, only one more erasure is needed to guide us together back up into the light. It's from Fiorelli's 1830 account of entering the House of the Faun, with additional words by classicists Alison E. Cooley and M.G.L. Cooley. You'll find it on page 9. The House of the Faun. There was no accurate system for identifying what is commonly known as the House of the Faun, has been called House of Pan, House of the Family, House of the Battle. The following extracts report the excavation. The house had been discovered in October to December. Once cleared, we were left free to direct our efforts to passing through the heart, the entrance private among the most surprising things, made up of 3 pieces and large rings of bronze decoration in the shape of dogs, gilded protecting deities with various colours and with gold leaf, the mosaic threshold, a large festoon of flowers and fruit. As I end, I'd like you to place your feet firmly on the ground. Now take slow, comfortable breaths in and out, holding in mind that decoration in the shape of dogs, gilded protecting deities with various colours and with gold leaf. Breathing comfortably, we are passing together up from the underworld. Greeting us is a large festoon of flowers and fruit, created by our mutual solidarity in this beautiful, art-filled physical space. Where silence is refused, healing can come. Thank you all for travelling with me today. When we stand together, we stand strong. Thank you all for being my audience.